Working Cows Podcast, episode 182.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Conard, host of the Working Cows Podcast, powered by the Global Ag Network. And again, want to remind you of the return of one of our favorite ag podcasts, the Fieldwork Podcast, with hosts Mitchell Hora and Zach Johnson. They speak every Wednesday with a new episode on all things sustainable agriculture, focusing on this season on Washington County, Iowa, where Mitchell farms and lives. And you can tune in and get a new episode every Wednesday, and it's a seasons-based podcast. So there's previous seasons you can go back. This is the third season, so be sure to check out the Fieldwork Podcast at fieldworktalk.org. You can tune in there on Wednesdays and find new episodes, or go back through their back catalog and look at what they've already produced. Today, we are joined by Chad Conard. Chad is a rancher from Colorado and a family operation with connections in Kansas as well. And we're going to talk to him today about some of the ways that they are employing stockmanship, specifically with bulls, to reduce stress and to help with just making bulls easier to deal with. And then also how those practices, those principles can help us as we answer questions being raised by people who are saying that there should be less meat in the American diet, or no meat at all in the case of Bill Gates. And Chad is a guy who oftentimes will write, I would call them articles, but maybe op-eds, or but he'll share those on Facebook. And so he recently posted one of those, and we're going to talk to him about that in connection with stockmanship and some of those things. It's just a good opportunity to sit down with Chad and pick his brain a little bit about some of the things that are interesting to him, and some of the ways that he thinks about these different opportunities. So Chad, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
No, thanks for having me, Clay. It's a pleasure. I always enjoy the content you produce and the guests you have. So I feel kind of honored, actually, to be on.
Yeah, well, it's been a long time coming. I've always appreciated your thoughts as you share them on Facebook, and so one of those recent thoughts kind of triggered this conversation. But a while back, there was even one before that I think is related too. So kind of regarding the issues surrounding stockmanship and training bulls and some of those things. So I always tell my dad whenever we're trailing bulls, I said it reminds me of being in a high school wrestling room where, somebody's walking and then somebody pushes somebody else, and then all of a sudden there's 2 or 3 guys piled up in a scrum. And so bulls can be kind of one of the more challenging animals that we deal with from a stockmanship perspective. I think just the added testosterone and wanting to see who's really where the pecking order is. So what are some of the things that you guys, or how are you thinking about your approach to a bull? And maybe start with, a lot of times we're not home raising these critters, so they're coming from somewhere else. So so we always have that training process for us and them. So how are you thinking about that process?
Actually on the Rancher Roping and Stockmanship page, Ryan Sexton kind of caught my attention when I saw him post a video of loading a bull out in the middle of grass in a trailer directly. And I kind of did one of those face palms, like, gee, what a moron I've been around cattle all my life. We have good horses. We do all single sire matings. The part of the country we're in, it's hard for us to get more than a quarter or half section of grass in one place. So we have pastures scattered out. So and it kind of fits our deal, how we try to manage genetics anyway. So we have a single bull with a group of heifers or cows, scattered out during breeding season. We normally kick out for 45 days on our heifers and 60 days on our cows. And the routine used to be drag a wheel corral everywhere, because none of our pastures have corrals in them. So,
Sure.
and everybody knows in July or August when you're doing that, that's not exactly a fun project, setting that up and dragging around. And the time, just the time and effort. I kind of worked out a deal with my brother and father a couple of years ago that just because I like doing the genetic research and some of those kind of things, I started sourcing all the bulls and I lease them to them for their cows. And I kind of took responsibility of it's my job to take them, get them fertility tested and get them turned out. And then after 45 or 60 days, it's my job to go get them caught. I kind of started putting some effort into in the spring, when we would have some of my good friends that are pretty handy come help for branding. We would have some downtime inevitably when we did a small bunch or whatever, and the weather was nice. We would pull a pickup and trailer into a pen that's probably, about the size of a roping arena, typical roping arena. And I could put it in a spot where I could pull my truck pickup through and close a gate between the pickup and against the trailer to at least cut the odds of bouncing a bull off the side of my pickup, as part of the deal. And we would go bring the bulls back from winter pasture to have them close. That way or penned up when it's time to go fertility test. And we would just take turns, whatever your comfort level is with your skill set, go sort one out of the bunch, bring him into that pen, work with him until he loads. When he loads, leave him alone. And I would tend to try to, I knew the bulls, so I would tend to try to pick on the ones that were problems and just going to fight with them. And then we would come back a few days later and do a repeat, but with just the ones that were harder to handle, that took more effort to load or tended to want to go through a horse. And we would work with them as singles or even in groups of 3, loading them like that until you could load them, a group of 3 bulls in the trailer, leave the gate open, leave the pen, go around the corner, water your horses, and all 3 bulls would be standing in the trailer. So it just make that the comfortable place to be and not, and try to do it all without picking a fight. And of course, over the years, we've gotten better at that, but it is pretty typical now. I can go out by myself with a horse, pull into a pasture, on 90% of them, I can say I'm out of there in 15 minutes or so with a bull in the trailer and a horse in the trailer, and no one got in a fight. No one got mad. No one threw anything. And it's a pretty smooth deal. It doesn't always go that smooth. There still is the random wheel corral event. That's just not going to work. Face it and don't pick a fight and keep going. And like you mentioned, most of our bulls we do source from people that don't have horses. We do watch disposition pretty well, but normally we are teaching them how to come off pressure from a horse, not go into it, give them time to think, get them settled down. But and I've gotten better at it over the years, certainly. And it was pretty eye-opening for me. A couple years ago, my brother helped me catch bulls, and I'd been doing it by myself before. So I had to think about a bunch of things that had kind of become natural to explain to him. Admittedly, it probably was yelled at him more than it should have been the first couple times, but it made me kind of figure out how to put into words, how you think about it as you're doing it.
Is this kind of a function of pressure and release, that if they're going the direction you want to go, you kind of take the pressure off? If they're trying to come back on you, you're not giving to their pressure. Is that part of what you're doing?
Yeah, to a point. And I wish it was a little bit closer to that simple. And you kind of got to know the bulls. There is some advantage there. There's some that they're bluffing, they're bluffing. You can stand your ground and not move your feet, not let them move your horse's feet, right? Just like you're saying. Normally, if I call it like the average event, I might have to put a little effort in with my horse to not let him get back to the cows. Once, I can walk into the bunch, sort him off. He's going to want to get back with the bunch. And I might have to put a little effort into not letting him get there. Some of them, though, I'll say the majority of them, at that point, once you get them stopped, you'll literally see them perk up and look around for the trailer, and they'll make a beeline for it. And that's just pretty cool. And then the challenge is how to not screw that up, right? How to dial the pressure way back. And then there's some that really want to go through you. Man, and I have some pretty decent cowy horses, but I've learned, when that bull's really wanting to go somewhere, you could do that cow horse down the fence thing with them and they will go through that pressure and keep coming into that pressure all day long. Mm-hmm. But if you just get wide, go past them, turn around and be facing them square with the goal of just stop their feet. Don't try to turn them. Just stop their feet. Give them a chance to think without applying so much pressure. And then take a new start of how little can I do to get him to turn back towards where I want. And from then I just kind of think about how do I guide the direction as softly as possible, let them pick the pace. But if it ever does come down to it, having that goal of just get their feet stopped first. And if there's two of us, the thing I learned right away too is that don't ever both of you advance or add pressure at the same time. Absolutely not. Even if you both think you're in the perfect position on a V to get the bull to go where you want, they just seem to respond so much better if I say, okay, I'm in a position to want to get him to move. You go he's going to want to, if he wants to go the wrong way, he's going to want to go there. You just kind of go take a blocking stance there and sit still and be cool about it. And that just seems to be so much more effective in getting them to just walk and think and not pick a fight.
Do you start every new bull in that pen kind of the size of an arena or?
That's my goal. I don't always get it done. I mean, life happens, right? I mean, last year we had one come up lame not too long before breeding soundness and turnout. And my dad ended up getting a bull that received and went to the pasture the next day because the corrals were muddy and there was not an opportunity to work on him. Right. So again, and the first couple of years I had more times and had to do that kind of stuff because we hadn't been practicing with him and teaching him. And the same kind of thing. I learned a bunch from that. Even those yearlings that hadn't been handled, it's still a big deal for him to see a guy on a horse the first time asking him to go somewhere. Sometimes you do have to get pretty much up in their grill to get them to respond. But I've also found too that if you can, and there's a way to turn your horse that at every turn you end up further away from the bull than you started the turn. I don't know if I can describe it. I can execute it. I'm not sure I can describe it. But literally every time you get him to yield, you're ending up in a spot 5, 6, 7 feet further away than where you were when you turned him. And you just keep creating more cushion and it kind of gets softer as you go instead of getting harder. And then as you're walking him back, you can kind of play with getting off in the left eye from a distance. And can I get him, if I'm out of his left eye, can I get him to just shift his right front foot to the right on one step? And I'll call that a yield and fade back out of the picture behind him. And then maybe do that from the right eye. And pretty soon you can build a bubble where you're influencing that bull from 20 yards away at a walk, and if you get that working, I've taken a bull like that where the heifers were in front of me and then my trailer was maybe 100 yards beyond that. And I've kind of been tangent, go right past the heifers without even looking at it. And I'll bet I was 50 yards behind him when he walked to the front of the trailer and stopped.
And so his concentration was on you rather than the heifers. Is that?
Honestly, there's a point at which you'll see their brain go in the trailer. That's the only way I can describe it. You'll see the ears go. I mean, they're thinking about that trailer. And if you don't mess that up, there's a large percentage of time they won't even break stride loading. Right.
So where's the trailer at in the pasture? Is it, I've done this before too. I don't know that we've done it without panels in a corner and two of us, but loading 2 or 3 bulls out of a pasture, and so are you doing this out in the middle of the pasture in the open more often than not nowadays? Are you backed into a corner? Or using some natural boundary, or what's it look like in your mind?
All the above. Depending on the pasture, I kind of pick what I think is going to be the easiest for that bull. I mean, no one's watching. There's no cameras. I don't have to be in the middle of pasture just to prove I can do it.
Right.
If there's a opportune space where the fence takes an inside corner and I can have the trailer gate positioned there to kind of use that fence on one side as a wing, take him to the fence and down the fence, I'll do it. There are places where I will back up and use a fence corner and a gate. It just kind of depends on what's there in the lay of the land and which way the wind's blowing and all those fun things, right? My dad and I 2 years ago, and this is kind of where I felt pretty good about where things were headed. We had a dozen of those bulls in a pasture where they'd been through the fall after we'd pulled them. And it was time to kind of bring them closer home just to make it easier for water and feed for winter before spring turnout. And we just took 2 trailers and 2 horses over there, pulled in a fairly rickety barbed wire gate. One of us angled one way, one of the other, and we both swung trailer gates open towards the outside fences, kind of in a V. We got around all dozen bulls, walked them up that V in between our 2 pickups and trailers into that corner, and just let them settle. And they kind of sorted themselves. I think it was 6 or 8 and 4. 8 went into one trailer and 4 in the other, and we closed the division gates and threw horses in behind and done. That felt pretty good that worked as well as that did.
Yeah. How much of it is you've mentioned a couple times that wait, that point when the bull's thinking about it, needs to make up his mind, and that probably, or in my experience, that happens a few different times in the trip, but we're admittedly gathering out of some really big pastures and it might be more than a mile or 2 to back to the trailer. But, how much of it is that having the patience to wait and let them think about it before we add pressure?
Yeah, it's everything, right? I mean, you can have one go to the trailer and stop right in front of it. And there's a moment there where really well-timed pressure might do something, but 90% of the time, you're just going to get him thinking about you instead of the trailer, and he's going to turn around and face you. And again, it depends on the bull and what you know about him, stuff like that. But yeah, there's all those opportunities to wait that I think a lot of people tend to miss. As humans, I think we naturally want to make them go somewhere instead of let them go somewhere, right?
Right. Do you think that a virgin bull, and when I say that, I mean virgin as in virgin to your stockmanship regime, in a pasture, will have that moment where it clicks in his mind, trailer is where I'm headed? Or do you need that relationship to be built up in that pen about the size of a roping arena for that click to ever take place?
No, I think it works. It comes faster and takes less work, certainly, if you've done the practice in the smaller pen, and then you get some repetitions in. But as long as my experience so far with those, as long as they've been loaded out of a wide area into a trailer with the gate wide open and not just pushed down an alley through the small door, they know what that trailer is at that point. And they kind of get the idea that, and maybe, probably most of the time they're just thinking about that as a way to get away from you, no different than they would going into the trees or the brush, right? Mm-hmm. But I guess I don't care what's in their mind at that point if they go in the trailer.
Right. The ends justify the means.
Yeah.
Sometimes. Yeah. Yeah. That can definitely be a slippery slope, but yeah, we're not worried about necessarily the psychology of it as long as they're headed in the direction that we want them to go.
And I think, if you do it right, that trailer does become a piece, right? You give them peace once they're in there, and that's what they want anyway. I mean, I had a heifer this summer. She had about a basketball size abscess up on her point of her shoulder. And that was in a pasture with the bull I knew was just super easy to load. And yeah, I've got a good rope and a good horse, and I could have roped her, but the wind was blowing 30 miles an hour, and I'd have been wearing half that abscess before I got that treated. And it was in a pasture that was 2 miles straight shot down the road from home. So I pulled my trailer in, got the heifer and the bull sorted off to where I could keep the heifer on the opposite side of the bull from my horse. And she kind of just trailed him to the trailer that way, knowing the bull was just going to go right in. And of course, she followed him, went right in the trailer. So saved me having to rope her and deal with an abscess on the ground. Had a place where I had running water to deal with it at home. So I unloaded her, put her in the alley, and while I've got her in the chute, that bull unloads by himself. I just left all the gates open, and he's you could tell he gets out. He's by himself. He gets nervous, and every time he would get nervous, he would go back in the trailer and stand because that was just his place of peace, right?
Yeah, comfort. Yeah, that's good. How much of this is keeping your testosterone in check when you're trying to deal with these critters?
Oh, a ton, right? If I get mad, I've got to stop and I've got better at controlling my emotions, right? Even when things don't go well, just not going there and not, and also recognizing that, hey, this isn't going to work. There's other pastures, other bulls to go get caught. I can come back with the wheel corral tomorrow and do it the less fun way, but he'll get caught without tearing down fences, getting a horse hurt, or getting me hurt. So,
what about help? In on the Zoom video here, I'm doing some scare quotes. What about help when you've got people come along, maybe that haven't been exposed to this way of handling critters, and they're kind of high pressure. We're gonna do this at a lope kind of a deal or whatever. How do you frame that in that discussion before horses are unloaded and cinches are tightened?
I've never had to deal with that specific thing. I mean, it's the I'd say the group of friends that come to our brand are pretty like-minded in terms of stockmanship and how to handle cattle. So even with the practicing, we haven't had to do a whole lot of coaching. We may offer some advice for some of the newer guys that hadn't done it as much, but and really when it's pulling bulls in summer, it has been me by myself, except for the 1 year my brother helped. And I probably didn't do enough explaining the first time, and not that he was wanting to run or do it a lope, just wanting to get a little too close, had a little too much pressure at the wrong time, some of those kind of things. And it's funny too, if your horse is a little less confident, even for a bull that isn't mean, isn't on the fight, but maybe wants to go through you, they perceive a horse squared up and straight at them so much different than a horse quartering away in terms of whether their willingness to go into that pressure. That it's pretty amazing. I mean, and so that is where a confident rider and a horse with some presence does make some difference, right? Not that you need to pick a fight, but it probably keeps the fight from ever happening.
What would that conversation sound like if you were, say, wanting to, have an apprenticeship relationship with somebody who wants to learn but maybe has come from maybe a more high pressure or adding pressure at the wrong time kind of regime? What would that conversation sound like for you? How would you start framing the way that you're thinking about these things to them?
Yeah, if I was going to come up with a few basic rules, so one I'm already mentioned, both of us aren't going to add pressure at the same time. So when he's stopped and we need to move him, we're going to talk to each other and have a game plan for what we're going to do. If he's going the wrong way, do not chase him and make him go the wrong way faster. Swing wide, get to where he wants to be before he does, or somewhere in between point A and point B before he does, without adding pressure, chasing him. Turn around and be squared up. Your goal isn't to turn him. Your goal is to stop his feet every time. Just if you start thinking about it that way, that takes a lot of the loping, chasing, coming into pressure out of the equation. Just that simple thought process alone, that get wide, beat him to where he wants to be, get turned, squared up, stop his feet, and we'll take a fresh start.
Yeah, that's real good. What are some other lessons that you've learned in handling critters this way and some of those things? What are some of the are there any other lessons, I guess maybe it's a better question, that come to mind?
Yeah, I'm not. I need to have these all wrote down sometime before we have this discussion, Clay. It's probably a place I could have prepped. So I'm not necessarily coming up with a lot of
That's all right.
other good thoughts. You've kind of brought up the crucial stuff, right? Controlling your own emotions, not picking a fight where there doesn't need to be one.
Yeah.
I mean, if there's one thing, there are some bulls it's just not going to work with, right?
Is that calling criteria?
Or at least with my skill set, there are some. I'll give you an example. We have a bull that we bought as a yearling from a guy that doesn't have horses, and we would have got him kind of when I was just starting to load him in the pasture hadn't thought of doing the practice thing before. And he had probably been handled with a four-wheeler enough. He got really adept at just going in and through pressure.
Mm-hmm.
That if he was coming down the fence, there was probably nothing on a horse you were going to do to stop him. You may influence him enough to turn him off the fence, but you're probably not going to stop him from going through the pressure. He isn't mean. You can handle him on foot. You can handle him in a pen with the horse. This last year, my friend and I took turns practicing loading that bull until literally in a pen to where you literally couldn't walk him by a trailer, and you could walk him down the length of the trailer and his head would be turning the corner by the time he got to the end. I mean, he wanted in the trailer and he would stand there and be quiet. And honestly, kind of thought we had that licked. And this year I took that group of heifers right up to the back of my trailer and settled them. And as soon as I sorted him off, he wanted to come into pressure right away. And I handled it as quietly and smoothly as I knew how to do to just try to get him on that side of the heifers where the trailer was, to kind of let him find it without doing much. And I completely failed at getting him to even consider going in that trailer.
Mm-hmm.
And so we caught him at the wheel crowd next day. The reality is he can settle a bunch of heifers. We never have to pull a calf. He's not mean, doesn't fight. I'm probably not going to call him over that, right?
Right.
I'm probably going to do a better job with the yearlings when I get them to not get them in that spot.
Sure.
But yeah, if they come out of a set of cows to take a horse,
yeah,
they're gone.
Right.
If they take a man on foot in a pen, they're gone. There's no gray area in our place. Cows or horses when it comes to that. If they're cow protecting or calf to a certain extent, okay, that's different, right? But if you have to get out of the pen because they're in it with you, we don't need them around. Again, my dad's 73 years old this year, runs the place by himself. I'm 5 hours away. My brother's 2 hours away. We're not there if something happens.
Yep. One question way back to the beginning, before we transition into a little bit more a different gear of applying this to some other discussions that are going on in the world of agricultural right now. You mentioned kind of a division of labor that you guys have come up with for your operation, where you are kind of doing the genetic investigation and sourcing the bulls. Could you just talk about some of the benefits of quote unquote division of labor when
Sure.
it comes to those kinds of things?
I mean, there's the parts of the day-to-day that we're all kind of drawn to that's different, right? I mean, my brother likes equipment more than I do. He's pretty handy on a horse. He can use a rope. He's effective handling cattle, no doubt about it. And he can be a really good horseman. But when it comes to who wants to be home to run a combine to harvest milo or wheat, or who wants to help plant wheat, if they're in a jam, I come help. But otherwise, that's kind of my dad and brother's deal. Who's worried about rotating pastures when we can to give rest? I'm the only one that probably thinks of that stuff. In general, I do the nutrition work. My dad's the day-to-day labor. Honestly, he's the one that's actually there doing everything. So a lot of the decision we make are around what's reasonable too. I mean, there are probably a lot of things we would like to do differently, but if it adds labor in the situation we're in, it's really not an answer, right? I tend to be the one that comes home I'll have a horse saddled the whole time I'm home, whether it's rotating pastures, doctoring stuff out on grass. You know, like I said, I do the nutrition work and then kind of do all the bull sourcing, knowing that if anyone has to pull calves, I'm the one that's going to hear about it. Or if there's a set of dinks when we wean, I know we know whose fault that is too. So,
well, it's always good to have accountability, right?
Exactly. And then
motivate.
Yeah, I've got to make the decisions on if they've got an attitude problem or whatever. You know, which ones go. Knowing I got to go buy a replacement.
Mm-hmm.
You know, lots of times I take my bull lease back in females. So I've been trying to source bulls that I really want to keep daughters out of, especially at this stage of the game we're at right now.
What do those selection criteria look like for you guys?
You know, for me, for females that I keep, you know, the bulls that I know I really want daughters out of, or possibly keep a son out of, they go on 8-year or older cows that are phenotypically the ones that kind of fit our deal, mature size about what we want, that have good udders. We tend to, you know, we have primarily a shorthorn based herd, so solid red and polled are also criteria we think of there. But those older cows, and then if I'm there when it's time to sort stuff and make those decisions, and let's say I got 3 replacement heifers coming to me out of this year's bunch, I'll look for the ones out of those cows that were born earliest in the calving season.
Sure.
You know, and I'll look for because of our tagging system, I can also tell when the mother was born in her calving season and how old her mother was when she had her. So I can look for an 8-year-old cow out of a 10-year-old cow that the cow was born early in the calving season. The daughter that's beside her was born early in the calving season. And those are the ones I'll cherry pick for myself if I get a chance. If I'm not there, then the rule is if it's 3, number the 10th one, the 20th one, the 30th one through the shooter mine.
Sure.
It's kind of the way we do it.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Or the year I traded them for bred heifers, every 10th one that calved was mine, kind of thing.
How do you think these conversations specifically about stockmanship are connected, or maybe the better way to ask that question is, but I don't like asking yes or no questions. So anyways, are these conversations about stockmanship connected to these ideas that are being thrown at the beef industry right now about sustainability and about whether or not rich countries, quote unquote, should be eating synthetic beef and those things? Is the stockmanship part of the answer when those accusations or questions are thrown at the beef industry?
Certainly they're part of the answer, but I think what's been interesting to me also is they're kind of a way to get some attention and start the discussion too. You know, a couple of the videos I posted last year when I was catching bulls where literally I had time to dink around on my phone on video with a 2-year-old bull that I had just bought that year that I'd done one practice with, and he's walking at a leisurely pace, stops for a half second and then walks in the trailer. You know, people that aren't around cattle or aren't into stockmanship, people that have been around cattle all their life that have never seen a different kind of stockmanship than what they're used to, or people that have never been exposed to cattle at all that are used to seeing working cow horse events down the fence and team roping and stuff like that. You know, in both cases, they just have no concept you can even do things like that, right? It's the thought never entered their mind. You know, I find those get widely shared and shared again until eventually you reach an audience that's not yours at all anymore, right? People that don't even know who you are. And that stimulates some conversations that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise. And then they ask questions and they get curious. And then you can get to some of the stuff that then they start asking you about, how do I pick beef in the store? When I see this in the news or I see this in the newspaper, what does that really mean? You know, it's led to some really good conversations, either face to face or on the phone or even over the internet on stuff like that.
So what are some of the other tools at our disposal, or what are some of the other data points that should be involved in responding to those things? What are some of the kind of baseline things that producers of beef should know beyond just, hey, this animal was raised in a low stress environment, as much as it depended on our ability to ensure that?
Yeah, I mean, I think people, my experience, it is one unique thing living away from the farm and ranch and living here in a lot closer to a metro area. I'm exposed to a lot more people that know a lot less about agriculture. It's not, people I visit with aren't just people in the beef industry. They are people trying to make decisions when they go to the store. And they are interested to learn more and know how the animals are raised. And, they do have questions. Clearly the climate change voice is pretty loud. It's amazed to me. It has been amazing to me when I've engaged in some of those conversations. There are some people that are really quick to reply, primarily, and maybe this is coincidence, primarily from the coasts and from Europe, that are very well armed with the FAO climate models on agriculture and cattle. And I will tell you, from trying to understand the real answer, those are pretty deeply flawed. They're based on a lot of assumptions from a lot of scientists, from peer-reviewed stuff, and a long ways divorced from actually seeing cattle grazing grass. There's a certain amount of fertilizer built into an assumption of a cow grazing grass. And I get that there are places in the world where they fertilize grass to get it to grow better. In the Great Plains of the United States, where a lot of our cattle are, we are pretty safe to say that artificial fertilizer is not part of that picture, and for the majority of those cows, right? So part of it is I think a lot of us understanding what drives those assumptions and those numbers and those beliefs, and knowing enough about them to be able to have a thoughtful discussion about them, right? Not just blow them off, ignore them, but have a deep enough knowledge to say, no, it is a little different than that, and here's why. I know in Nebraska, in Iowa, for corn, in Kansas for milo, we graze a lot of crop stover. So after that row crop is pulled off, hot wire goes up and cows go in. So that's a low quality roughage source that has zero value in the food chain anywhere except that cow. And she deposits microbiology and nutrients behind her while she does it. That's not in any of the models. And what the difference is in that corn production, whether it goes to ethanol or gets fed to an animal later, whether that cow grazed that corn stalk or whether there was rye distributed in with that to grow as a cover crop to have with the corn stalk, no one even understands the difference in the impact in the models for things like that we know. I know you and I would both agree, things that consume less resources, build soil health, and are part of a more efficient system.
Yeah. I did some back of the envelope dumb guy math one time, and I'm far enough out in my production of podcast episodes. I'm not sure if I recently shared this or not, but that, 82% of the beef animal that ends up in the traditional, cooler at a grocery store, 82% of their life was spent on forage of some kind, whether that was wheat stubble or grass or whatever, and then that's not to mention the comparison of his mom, his or her mom, who spends 100% of her life in most cases, on grass, and that's years, hopefully years and years of her life, productive life, is spent out there on grass. So I think those are some of the things. I don't know. Is that at least in the ballpark as far as a number is concerned? 82%.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty good number, and the grain numbers still even beyond that tend to get overinflated. The rations we feed in those feed yards today are quite different than they were 20 years ago. You can find plenty of places in feed yards where corn is less than half the diet, or grain is less than half the diet,
even up to the day of slaughter.
Yeah, all the way through, because of byproducts from other industries, whether that's distillers grains from the ethanol industry, a corn gluten feed product from wet mills making food products, even corn, peas, and green beans from frozen vegetable operations, potato waste. Then there's things like cottonseed hulls. I mean, a ration in a High Plains feed yard in, I'll say, the 80s, 90s would have been 70, 80% grain, corn. Today, it's not hard to find them where it's less than half. And that is quite different. And our efficiency in converting that in there is also totally different. I mean, another place I would go, and maybe this may not be horribly popular with part of your audience necessarily, so I'm probably taking a risk going there. You know, I think in some of these discussions, we get kind of single-minded of whether it's a low input design or a grass-fed or completely grass, and that feedlots are bad, right? You know, I have a hard time seeing the world that way. I've really sought to understand and tried to model what would that look like, right? And compare, and what are the differences? And there's a couple of biological facts that are really hard to get around. So for that acre of dryland corn ground, just awesomely fertile corn ground in Iowa, where you do have a limited growing season, right? You're not going to grow stuff in January there. Best case, you can raise about a third of the calories available to ruminant as grass as you can as corn on that same acre of ground. And that's not counting the value of the corn stover. That's only counting the value of the grain. I mean, that plant is just so efficient as harnessing CO2 and sunlight and storing it as a carbohydrate as grain. There's not grasses in that climate that can compete that way and be that nutrient dense, right? Even modeling like dryland ground like we have in Kansas at 18, 20 inches of rain a year, it's like a 3-to-1 on milo versus grass. For that same acre of ground. And not saying the world should be all grain, but let's face it, we are raising grain for things. There is a place that cows fit into that model with grain. And probably there's a system that optimizes the use of both that makes more sense for the long term than saying all one or all the other. And at least that's my thoughts after really seeking to understand it and crunching the numbers, right? And trying not to just make an opinion or what I wish was true.
No, that's something I always appreciate about you and my interactions with you. It's always numbers based. It's always seems to be, at least as far as I'm able to discern, well researched and those things. And you know, I think that even John Kemp, when he was on the podcast way back when, he's gone on, you know, I had him on right at the start of his podcast, the Regenerative Agriculture podcast. He said one of the best things that we can grow to sequester carbon, kind of what you're talking about, is corn. I mean, it's incredibly good at sucking that carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it, as you said, as a carbohydrate.
Another interesting fun fact, and I was just curious, so I went and found the numbers, and I'm not sure I got them exactly right, but certainly I got enough to know that they're in the ballpark. We're at a spot in the U.S. today where the annual sales of Beyond Meat and the Impossible option is about the same gross sales as grass-fed beef in the U.S. I mean, I was kind of shocked, honestly. You know, I realized neither one of them were a big piece of beef consumption in the U.S., but to say they've caught up with grass-fed that quick is pretty incredible. Because I wouldn't say they're that great tasting of products from my own personal experience. The closest thing I've ever had to a Beyond Meat burger was a hamburger at the lunchroom in high school. So I can't speak to that. Yeah, you know, I wouldn't necessarily go spend my own money to go find the answer, but I did get a chance with a group to be involved in a blind taste panel. They did 80-20 typical hamburger. They did 80-20 Wagyu burger. They took every alternative that has been in supermarkets since the 70s, and we did little sections tasting of every one of them and rated them on different flavor scorings. And some of them were really bad. Some of them might have been like a savory Thanksgiving stuffing that weren't even trying to be meat, just a flavorful meat alternative, right? And then Obviously, the Beyond Wheat and Impossible Burger were part of that. So I have tasted them all. So I can honestly say that I've tried it and understand the difference from a flavor standpoint.
Yeah. Would you say that your goal is to equip, and I'm sorry for the lack of a better word, but is your goal, partly your goal, to equip conventional agriculture with a way of answering the accusations of the Bill Gateses of the world, or what's your goal in some of these different projects that you've researched and different things that you've posted?
Yeah, I guess I think about it as how can we be armed to engage in the conversation? There was the MIT Technology Review that had the Bill Gates interview here not too long ago. There's parts of that I would concede he's right. There's parts of that he conceded, right? I mean, he came out and said in the U.S. model for producing beef is not similar to the numbers for the rest of the world, right? We're so much more efficient that our footprint, our resource footprint to produce that pound of beef is on a different level than the rest of the planet. And then he still comes out and said in his answer, right, that, yeah, but we should quit eating meat. And he even talks about should be able to label the alternatives as beef. I mean, but there are, I think of it as how do you arm people with enough of the right kind of information and get them to critically think about how could that be true or why is that not true, and engage in the conversation. I mean, because everyone wants the oversimplified, it's this answer, and that's almost never the truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's some version of the truth with one set of assumptions.
Yeah, no doubt. Where are you finding resources? I mean, is it just publicly available data? Where are you going to find some of these answers?
It depends on the topic. And it's interesting, as much as people talk about algorithms, you can use those algorithms to your benefit. I stumbled on this by accident because of, I've been working on my master's. When I do research on a topic, I tend to scroll by the New York Times articles, the USA Today, and go to the peer-reviewed, for real, how do I get the facts stuff. As a result, when I Google the same thing that someone standing next to me does, we don't necessarily see the same things.
Right. So
I've gotten pretty good at how do I get to the facts in that regard. I do rely a lot on public stuff. And then I do have the opportunity to draw from my own experience too, right? If I use the public information to say, okay, what is that energy density in megacows per acre to a ruminant for that milo versus that grass, I can do the back of the napkin. Even with our best rotation, we get this many cows that must have been consuming this much dry matter in this many days, and I can compare that to the numbers on paper and say, does that reconcile, right? Are those reasonably close together to way so I can say that's in the ballpark, right? And then I've spent, it's scary to say, I've been 29 years out of college now with an engineering degree and worked in the food processing industry for a good chunk of that. So I'm very familiar with a lot of these big agri-processing plants, what their energy usage is, how they function, why they're built, how they're built, how byproducts work, a lot of those kind of things too. So I've got that it kind of gives me a little bit of a unique perspective because of I've got firsthand experience with that. I'm very involved in the cattle feeding industry professionally. My family has a cow-calf operation and dryland farming. So it does give me opportunity to look at more than one facet of things and not just depend on the public information, because even the best intentioned public information, a published paper, may have to use some scrap of information that showed up in the 80s for how many BTUs of steam it takes for a certain production process. We could be way more, that could be just an order of magnitude wrong because of how the world's changed since then, right? And sticking by that's how a lot of these models get wrong assumptions built into them, is from that exact thing, right? Because a lot of that information is not public and people that are close to the industry with first-hand knowledge aren't participating, right? I mean, Bill Gates, if I give him the benefit of the doubt that he has the right intentions, it doesn't mean that people, and we all know he's not out working cattle or feeding cattle, right? So whatever opinions he has on the subject, because let's face it, he's a brilliant guy, are formed by the people around him providing the information. And who knows where that's coming from, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Very good. You have a ground up, literally a ground up perspective on the U.S. beef industry, just given your history and experience.
I try.
And you said an engineering degree? What's the master's degree?
It's animal science focused on ruminant nutrition.
Okay. And so, are you done with that? Or are you still pursuing?
I have, next fall I'll be done. I got 2 classes I'm taking right now, 1 next fall, and then I'm done.
Gotcha. But, and that's the cattle feeding side of things, is what drew you to that, or what drew you into the master's program?
Professionally, like I said, I have an engineering degree. Started out as doing process engineering, plant construction type activities, and agri-processing. Eventually that evolved to where I've been working in a feed business within that, focused around commercial cattle feeding and dairy operations. I worked with 2 just absolutely fantastic PhD ruminant nutritionists for over 20 years. I learned a ton from those guys. And because of my cattle connection, I just devoured everything I get my hands on, papers around steam flaking and starch digestion and nutrition. Eventually, I'm the commercial leader for part of that group and the technical people that report to me. So I have PhD ruminant nutrition. Since those 2 gentlemen retired, I have PhD ruminant nutritionists and veterinarians reporting to me. With 20 years experience and my thirst for knowledge, I've got a pretty good background, but there's some technical stuff I just wanted to get. I wanted to know it. I wanted to know I knew it, not just think I knew it. And at a deeper detail than I was going to be disciplined enough to do completely on my own, self-study. So in my master's program, I have been cherry picking. I've been taking a lot of PhD level classes in some aspects as electives, just because of this is the stuff I want to learn by the time I'm out of here. And it is nice. I mean, if there's a positive side, and there probably are a few positive side to the events of the last year, there are more of these courses for some of the best instructors in the world online now. You take without being at that university. I got to take rumen microbiology and rumen metabolism from one of the best out there through the K-State Vet School as a distance class. I did an animal growth development through Clemson. I'm doing feedlot nutrition through University of Nebraska. Just those kind of opportunities I want to go learn it from them because they've done most of the research in the part of it that I'm most interested in, kind of thing, which has been a really cool opportunity. And your ability to learn as an adult with experience in the field already is pretty incredible, right? For every lecture, how you're going to use that information and what you don't understand about it and why you want to understand it.
Right.
So
you've got the bricks in place. You're just putting the mortar in there.
Yeah. I'm learning totally differently than I did 28 years ago, 30 years ago in college.
Yeah. What's the value to the 200 head cow-calf operator to some of that knowledge for them? I mean, I know the value for you and in the more efficient processing of nutrients and more quickly, turning those nutrients into a pound of beef and delivering nutrients, more efficiently, those kinds of things. But what, in your mind, what's the value for the cow-calf operator to pursue some of that same training, and where should they go to do it?
Yeah, there are some good programs. So a couple of goals I have, and I suppose if I say this out loud to you, someone will hold me accountable to actually do it. I've started on. I'm pretty good at starting stuff sometimes and not getting back to it. Rumen microbiology. I'm trying to work on a paper around rumen microbiology geared towards that person that never had it in school, that is around cattle every day. So what's the applicable version of that content, right? Not the in-depth memorizing parts of certain microbes or the names of certain strains of microbes and what they do, but how do you adapt an animal from forage to grain? what are the implications of switching them to wheat pasture off of dry grass? Some of the applied version kind of things. So I think there's some elements of nutrition. I've got a paper I've completed that I need to kind of adjust a little bit for that audience too, on what are all the nutritional aspects that impact reproduction in beef cattle in a practical way, right? So I think a lot of that is there are opportunities to make better decisions, I think. And so many people that with good intentions rely on the feed company or whatever. They've got this product they want to sell. I need some protein. They got this product they want to sell me. Whereas I can look at that label and say 2/3 of this you don't even need, and effectively you're getting charged $300 a ton, where most of the protein's coming from urea. There's a better alternative. There is a better, lower cost alternative. And a lot of people just don't have the knowledge to even be able to effectively evaluate a mineral or something they're being sold to understand, is that really what I need? And should I spend the money on it? And there are opportunities to get that right and save a lot of money in the process. I mean, you can get the nutrition right without spending a ridiculous amount of money. This year will be an exception because our pasture rent hasn't changed, or the value of our pasture hasn't changed, but corn has gotten a lot more expensive than normal. But in a normal year, we come off our grass in November, go to Milo crop residue, which it's on our own ground. For us, it's effectively no out-of-pocket cash to carry those cows for a couple months. We may do some supplementing towards the end of that. At some point, we transition everything to a total mixed ration based on ground hay, silage if we've got it, some dry rolled corn, and wet distillers as a protein source. And then I have a supplement, a mineral package custom made to match that. On a cost per head per day, that's it rivals our grass cost, honestly.
Yeah. Does that say something about the cost of grass and maybe the market needing a correction? Or
compared to some places in the country, I would say our grass in our area is pretty cheap because it hasn't got a lot of competition pressure. I mean, we're still $15 to $22 an acre for an annual lease on land that'll carry, in a normal year, about 10 acres per pair. That's a buck a pair a day is fairly cost effective, quite frankly, compared to a lot of places in the country.
For sure. Well, Chad, I appreciate your time today. This will be out towards the end of March, first part of April. Any links that you want to throw up there? I'll probably post I'll link to one of your recent Facebook posts that kind of dealt with some of these issues. But anything else, any other resources that you'd like up at the show notes page?
Not that I can really think of. I don't have a web page. I don't really do a lot of promotion. So sure.
Well, in any case, you've got till the end of March or the first part of April to consider more pursuit of the education piece.
Okay. And if you, there are some good online programs, and I have assembled those before. I could pull those together.
Okay.
University of Nebraska has some really good stuff. There is an Ag Idea program that not a lot of people know about. That's a cooperation through lots of universities. So the beef production systems is taught through Oklahoma State. The ruminant nutrition is taught through North Carolina State. It's a graduate level class, but you don't have to be a graduate student to take it. You can pursue an animal science certificate through that, for example, and pick the classes. And it is all distance. So it's done online to where the content's in weekly chunks. So you don't have to be online for a Zoom lecture right now. They're all recorded, and you can consume it when you have the opportunity and keep up with the coursework. There are some good resources out there like that didn't used to exist.
Very good.
And also, Clay, you get to edit this and decide there's a piece you missed or something stupid I said we need to undo, just holler.
It's all good. So, appreciate your time today.
All right. Thanks a lot. Hopefully you get some rain this winter.
Yeah.
Rain this spring.
Yeah. No doubt. Good stuff there. Appreciate Chad and his time. Coming up next week, or actually later this week, I'm going to release a bonus episode with Austin Hart. Austin is working for a company selling pasture, range, and forage insurance, and had actually sat down with him and talked about what it might look like on our place to employ some of these things. And so I'm going to release a bonus episode with Austin Hart this week about pasture, range, and forage. So if you're not aware of what pasture, range, and forage insurance is, be a good opportunity to tune in and see about what it might look like for you to employ some of those things on your operation. So look forward to that coming up later this week on the Working Cows podcast. And next week, next Monday, we will be talking with the crew from Native Microbials about what they are doing to impact the efficiency of rumen and some new products that are coming later on. I think early 2022, they will be released into the beef industry. But Native Microbials is working to impact very strategically the rumen health of animals, and we're going to talk to the founder, and one of the people boots on the ground, rumen microbiologist, looking at all the different communities and how we can impact those relationships to make them operate more efficiently. So that's what we got coming up. Next couple episodes of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you again real soon with another episode of the Working Cows podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.